Recording in progress.
Welcome back to this afternoon's session 3 of the inaugural Cannabis and Sports Conference. Session 3, we're going to be looking at today's priorities to consider. My name is Josephine Cannella-Krehl. I work as physician and clinical community relations for the Flowery. We're one of Florida's medical cannabis dispensaries, and we operate out of Homestead, Florida. I also founded MMJ Knowledge, and I was doing a lot of mainstream medical cannabis education for allied healthcare professionals and attorneys and clinical oncologists in Florida. My background, I've worked in the cannabis legislative advocacy space with other social justice warriors like Dr. Gordon and the group of physicians that he works with, Eric Stevens with Florida for Care, Florida Cannabis Action Network. So we're so glad that you guys could join us and that we're starting to open this cannabis and sports conversation because it's a really important one for us to have. It's always my pleasure to be able to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Gordon, who operates the Compassionate Cannabis Clinic out of Venice, Florida. And Dr. Gordon will be talking to us about pearls from clinical practice.
Listen, I have to first start off by thanking Josephine, not just for today, but for what she's been doing here in Florida. Can I say 30 years? Not 20, no, for 10 to 15 years. There's been a group of advocates here in Florida, going all the way back before Amendment 2 and otherwise. I believe, 14 or so? Right. And Josephine has been right there, and I'm so appreciative of every one of those early advocates that, quite frankly, blazed the trail. I just kind of picked up the ball and ran with it. Awesome conference. I want to thank Jeff for the invitation and Gene for consistently putting on what, in my opinion, are the best conferences here in Florida. There actually was one earlier sports medicine conference with cannabis. It was in Miami. It was the famous conference where Matt Gaetz actually went to the Bahamas after that conference. I had the opportunity to meet Roger Stone at that conference, right? And Jim McMahon was actually our keynoter. So AMPA, of course, has gone the way of others, and we are so appreciative of this forum because of how important it is. Some of you that have seen me talk before, you may recognize some of the slides. I pull them from a deck called Medical Cannabis and the Florida Experience. 10,000 patients and the 10 things I know. And I think I probably have seen 10,000 patients here in Florida at this point. My wife will probably say 15,000 or so. And I want to acknowledge her as my partner throughout this process. She was the original educator in my clinic, which is the Compassionate Cannabis Clinic in Venice. If you want to get a hold of me, these are the best ways to do it. And I have no financial interest with anybody. I speak for nobody but myself, my experience, and my practice. Once again, this is where you can find me. We do have a weekly podcast. It's called The Green Room. It's on Thursday mornings at 8:30, and it's on YouTube. Believe it or not, we have 102 episodes in the can. And I may be soliciting some of you to be my next guests. This is me and my background. OH? Anybody out there? No? Thank God. I know we got some Michiganders here, but that's okay too. My background is emergency medicine, and I did my entire emergency medicine career up in Ohio, Northeast Ohio. And listen, it was a great 34-year career. Second picture of Dr. Meshulam today. This one being a little bit more recent. This was at the CanMed. 3 years ago at this point. COVID is such a time warp. But I had the unique opportunity to meet Dr. Meshulam and to hear him lecture. It was awesome. So this lecture, you may have seen, it's called The 10 Things I Know. And these are the things I know. The first is the why, right? And I have it broken up into 3 sections. The why, the what, and the how. It's a doctor's moral imperative in 2022 to be a 2022 doctor. This is how I explain it to people. If I would have started practicing emergency medicine in 1982 and practiced 1942 medicine, what kind of emergency doctor would I be? And I say that the same to the doctors of today, especially those coming out of training, out of med school. You know, Jeff's right, my tongue bleeds at various times during the day because I know why they're not teaching it in med schools right now. And it's an answer that's infuriating. It's a catch-22 answer. The answer is because it's not on the national board tests. When cannabis starts appearing on the tests, then they'll have to teach about it, right? And it's stupid. How could you have people coming out of a med school environment, a residency environment now, and not knowing the endocannabinoid system, the fact that 15 to 20% of their patients are probably utilizing cannabis, and if they're not savvy enough to understand it and to know how to talk to their patients about it, then you're really doing a disservice to the healthcare system. So to me, it's an imperative, and the three things that I know based on my 30 plus years of emergency medicine experience, no one has ever died of a cannabis overdose. Nobody ever will. As I like to say, it's one of my standard jokes. The only way somebody has ever died from cannabis is if you're smuggling it out of Vietnam and a 100-pound bale of it hits you in the head and breaks your neck. Other than that, no one's ever going to die of a cannabis overdose. The receptor system doesn't allow it. Acute and chronic use. Acute and chronic use of cannabis compared to alcohol clearly favors cannabis use. I mean, it's the kind of thing that Nancy Reagan just say no has been bouncing off teenagers and otherwise and whatever for years because everybody's gotten smarter through the years. You know, it's tobacco and alcohol that are causing the vast majority of healthcare dollars being spent in this country and the disaster in the ER. I've never seen a husband and wife pair or any domestic partner pair beat up their partner after smoking a joint together. It just doesn't go that way. And if you talk to the paramedics, they'll tell you they don't make runs on cannabis patients. They don't. Yet we know of alcohol and, of course, opiates. People are fascinated, and we'll get into a couple, we'll leave that for the next couple slides. Lives are destroyed by alcohol, drugs, sexual addiction, tobacco, overwork, gambling. Pete Rose, right? Art Schleister, if any of you remember the old Ohio State quarterback, right? So people go down over a lot of things. Cannabis, due to its lack of physical addiction, rarely, if ever, destroys or results in the destruction of self or families. I'm glad I put this up because, you know, we assume that everybody knows about cannabis and knows about what it does, but I know there's some people here that really don't. And for the gentleman, you know, at the table there, I can't wait to get into a little bit of discussion of dosing of cannabis. But here's the point. It's not called the endocannabinoid system for nothing. Greek, Latin root, right, whichever one it is, within us. So it's an organ system that is within us top to bottom. The CB1 receptors, and I'll, you know, who was our dear friend Bill Monroe, okay, that used to speak of the CB1, may he rest in peace, who the most basic of early discussions that we ever had, with the CB1 receptors being those above the shoulders and the CB2 receptors being below the shoulders. It's not universal, but the CB1 receptors are the primary receptors in the brain that react to delta 9, everybody, delta 9 THC. I'm amazed by the lack of discussion yet in this forum of delta 8 THC, 10, 6, OA, HHC, P, garbage. There's doctors that sell it out of their office now, today, with same-day referrals here in Florida to the MMTC world. It's an entire another lecture that I'm not going to get into. But it's delta 9 THC, okay? That's the true cloud of smoke hanging over Woodstock, as you may call it. I call it Michael Jackson of the Jackson 5. If you don't have Michael, you can't have the Jackson 5. I don't care if he's 8 years old or if he's 40 doing the moonwalk. So I have a lot of respect for CBD, but what I do for a living is entourage product, full spectrum cannabis medicine, and that includes THC. If you leave THC out of the equation, then you're not talking medical cannabis. That's just my humble opinion, and I'm going into the grave that way. Hopefully not for a long time. Anyway, so these are some slides, and I'm not going to go through all of them because I don't have that much time. but I wanted to make sure that they were in the deck. And it just once again talks about the endocannabinoid system being within us. The phytocannabinoids are from the plant, match the endocannabinoids of anandamide and 2-AG, and I guarantee you Dr. Newton's going to give a much better lecture about that stuff than I. What I was referring to earlier, believe it or not, people are fascinated when I tell them that in the first 16 years of my emergency medicine career, so I started about 84 or so, and that went to about 2000. In that 16-year period of time, and I did an audit on it, I think I did about 6 combined narcotic overdoses in that entire 16 years. And that's in Akron, Ohio, and Mansfield, Ohio, and Cleveland, Ohio, and big cities. People say, how can that be? 6 in 16 years? Heroin was heroin. It's always been around, but the heroin addict knows what he's doing. The heroin addict knew his supply. It wasn't a particularly healthy lifestyle, but they weren't showing up in the ER day after day after day dead. Then, all of a sudden, in 2000, came OxyContin, okay, somehow Purdue and McKesson and all them, they somehow convinced doctors, we're going to put this coating on it, and all of a sudden this narcotic is not going to be addictive. And people aren't going to be able to abuse it either, well, until they can crunch it up, right? So we saw this pill mill crisis. Believe it or not, in Ohio, it affected us from Florida. There used to be a $75 round-trip airline flight from the Akron-Canton Airport to Fort Lauderdale. The addicts would literally get the money from the guy in Ohio who would pay for them to go to 4 clinics down in Florida, get back on the 7:30 flight, and split up the 800 Percocets when they got off the plane. So all of a sudden in Ohio, we're seeing all these overdoses. We had no idea. Now we know because we've seen how the stories have come. But of course, later in my career, it would be 6 a month, 6 a week, depending on what your facility in. Even to the point where you would see an addict at 10 or 10:30 in the morning, discharge him after a wonderful lunch and a good social service referral and with his family, and they'd be back at 4 o'clock because they go home with their family and find their stash and do it again. So it was an entirely different world when I retired from the emergency medicine biz than it was when I started. Now, of course, we have single exposure overdose to death, right? And that's carfentanil and fentanyl, and believe it or not, starting to creep into the cannabis supply. And I'm not going to be here being an alarmist over it. In the ER world, we always poo-pooed it. No fentanyl in the cannabis supply. But believe it or not, there's been 2 cases documented here in Florida that there has been no other cause of this person dying except for the fentanyl exposure that somehow was in their cannabis. We believe it might have been on the baggie or it might have been in the cannabis when they crunched it up. When you smoke a joint with fentanyl in it, the heat destroys the fentanyl so you don't die. But if you lick, right, your fingers, it's happened. And I can't believe it's happened, and I can't believe they even have to talk about it happening, but it behooves the practitioner now to understand that you need to be a safety officer as well for your patients. So science is the key. Once again, CB1 and CB2 receptors. I'm glad we have Terel here, and Dr. Vidot, I think, is joining us as well remotely. And I know they're going to be much more scientific than I, because I am but simple ER doctor, and I like to stay within my lanes. So the social consequences, of course, of prescription drug, alcohol, and other abuses. There's just some stats, and we all know. I mean, we're preaching to the choir here. So that was the why. Here's what's interesting. It's the who, right? And this is where my tongue has been bleeding a little bit, Jeff, of course, throughout the various sessions, because who comes into my clinic, everybody, is everybody. And I mean everybody, right? But here's what every single person that comes in desires. They all want to, no matter what their symptoms, be it sleep, be it pain, be it anxiety, be it tremor, they want to feel the very best they can. They want to do it in the most natural and safe way that they can. People do their own reading now, right? They're more savvy than they used to be. It's a dimension of society itself. And they want to be legal in their use of medical cannabis. Those 3 things, basic for every single patient. No patient wants more pharma. They all want less. And rarely, if never, do we have the patient come in and say, oh boy, can I not wait to get high, right? People that want to get high, they've been getting high for years. They're on the legacy market. If they want to stay on the legacy market, they can stay on the legacy market. But even those patients are coming in because of the safety side. They want legal recognition, right? And we make sure that they get the education, right, to make them better cannabis consumers. And that's just a philosophy that I've developed because of the next couple of things that you'll see in the next few slides. So anyway, here we are, over 700,000 patients in Florida right now, right? And it's growing. I think the latest OMU update from yesterday was 739 or something like that. Doctors, though, on the other hand, numbers go down. So we're losing doctors in the state right now because how complicated the state has made it. And that's an entire another lecture in and of itself. So who is it for? And I know the conditions here in Florida, and they are Florida specific. Each state has their own kind of silly little system. But these are the qualifying conditions here in Florida. Cancer, epilepsy, glaucoma, HIV and AIDS, somehow 2 different categories. PTSD, ALS, interestingly, my smallest category of patients. Crohn's disease, not ulcerative colitis. We'll get to that in a second. Parkinson's disease, not essential tremor. We'll get to that in a second. MS, terminal conditions. And if I'm dying, man, let me smoke weed. I mean, come on. Chronic pain, right? Medical conditions of the same kind or class or as comparable to those enumerated within the law, essential to the practice here in Florida, as I mentioned during one of the earlier sessions. So to me, the advocate cannabis physician in Florida actually has a fantastically written law. You need to respect the plant, you need to respect the patient, you need to educate the patient, but literally, in my humble opinion, and I wish the physician was, who asked the question earlier was here now. My belief is that every citizen of the state of Florida who desires legal, safe access to cannabis, who pulls money out of their pocket to come in and see me in my clinic, who takes the time and the effort to come in and see me in my clinic, deserves to have me as their advocate. That the state may want me to be their policeman, but I just don't feel that's the role of the physician in 2022. I just think we've seen too many people die of narcotic overdose, of overuse of alcohol acutely and chronically, of depression and suicide, that at this point in time, it just behooves the advocate physician at this point to know the law, respect the law, follow the law, but take care of your patients. So this is why I developed the attitude that I did, because I developed early on this Q1, keep an eye on my time too, Josephine, because, but I see I'm okay so far. Q1 through Q5 qualifying scale, right? So a Q1 qualifier meets Florida's conditions. And as I've joked with many a patient, and I joke pretty much every day, all day, there's never a day you want to have cancer or MS or Parkinson's or whatever, but hey, if you want to qualify for the medical cannabis program in Florida, then today's your day. But the point is, look at the things that are not covered. So the Q2 qualifiers are so close to the 11, who can argue? And they have medical records to prove it. This is your patient who has essential tremor, so bad they can't even do their computer work, but the neurologist hasn't gotten around to calling them Parkinson's yet, right? It's your ulcerative colitis patient who's got the exact same pathology of the large intestine as the small intestine Crohn's patient. So I learned, I'm telling you, within the first week of my practice, I said, who the hell wrote this law? What attorneys or what idiot politicians, wrote this law? What lobbyists for the Crohn's Foundation paid more than the lobbyists for the Ulcerative Colitis Foundation? And what idiots didn't just call it inflammatory bowel disease or movement disorders? So whatever, solved it. Q3s, how about patients with chronic migraines? Chronic Lyme disease, chronic mono. They'll go all over the country looking for solutions. A guy with 3 failed back surgeries and metal up and down his back, And they have medical records like that to prove their medical conditions. I got to go back, and I know I can. If you look at chronic pain in Florida, you see the asterisk? The asterisk has been there, I can't say that well, has been there from the get-go. That chronic pain is only supposed to be coming from the other qualifying conditions that are not currently active. Not rheumatoid arthritis, not osteoarthritis, not trauma, not failed surgery. You can have your arm cut off at the elbow and have phantom pain. That doesn't qualify. You can be impaired by stroke with half of your body in pain and spasm, and that doesn't qualify. So it's idiotic, but significant debilitating illness with doctors' medical records. Every single one of those patients has some form of PTSD. Their illness is their PTSD. If you can't bend over on Sunday morning to pick up a newspaper, much less go play golf with your buddies like you'd want to do, believe me, that's anxiety and depression. And I don't need to send somebody to a psychiatrist to get the diagnosis either. I'm a doctor. I make my own diagnoses. One of the big things about Florida, the doctors are always so afraid of making their own diagnoses. Listen to your patient, document the chart, make the story about why the patient is here, do the right thing, and take care of your patient. But every single one of these patients that comes in with a check, listen, those of us that have practiced medicine for a long time, before the computer, there was the medical records room, okay? And in the ER, they would bring up the medical records from the medical records room. And the higher the stack, the more problems the patient had. So these patients deserve care. Who's the Q4 qualifier? They're interesting. So what if you're 30 years old and you haven't seen a doctor for about 12 years? But when you're 18, your parents took you to the doctor because, he wasn't doing well in school, or he's depressed, or he's anxious, so they put you on Klonopin. They put you on Adderall, Ritalin, and Vyvanse, right? A lot of these kids, they go to college and they find out that, quite frankly, cannabis works better than that stuff, right? But now they're 30, they've been buying a bag of illegal cannabis every month or so, treating their issues, okay, be it mild depression, be it sleep disorder. Maybe they'd rather do that than drink alcohol. Believe me, you go to a bar these days, you can get shot in the parking lot, right? So some people just societally decide that they want to use cannabis. And you know what? They have no medical records. What are you supposed to do about them? They have a job. They have 2 kids. They're going to work every day. They're paying their bills. They're paying their taxes. They know that the anxiety in their craw, if they run into law enforcement, it can ruin their life. That's a pretty bad social anxiety disorder that I think is fairly similar to PTSD, because we live in Florida, and it's beautiful, and it's sunny here. But it's pretty conservative, too. So to me, if those patients are going to come in to see me, we're going to educate them into being better cannabis consumers. And who's the Q5 qualifier? That would be the person that just wants to take CBD with maybe a little pinch of THC because they have 8 members of their family that have Alzheimer's disease. And they've read, that maybe cannabis may be one of the few things that stops the formation of the amyloid plaques. So to me, you got to be an advocate, I guess would be that message. Our clinic, who's coming in, right? So from the day I opened, and we opened up back in January of 2017, first clinic on the west coast of Florida to only do medical cannabis. Average age of our patients has been about 53 to 55 years old. That remains to this day, right? The common desires of the patient, once again, to feel better, more natural treatment, legal status. These are how it happens in Florida. Most people know this, the debilitating condition. You have to see a physician physically in the same room to get into the medical cannabis program. There are those that operate outside of the law in Florida. Don't get caught or trapped that way. We put them into the state registry, and we recommend cannabis. We don't prescribe. Patient and caregiver card. And then we get 3 70-day order sets, everybody. So every 210 days, patient has to come in and see us. People say, why 210 days? Nobody knows, but I know it's not half of 420. They're not that smart. That's not how they came up with it. And my belief is that will not change until whatever happens in Florida next step, legal adult use, whatever. I see no interest in the state changing the program. We tried to go to once a year. They wouldn't hear of it. I'd love to see the card go to every 3 years. They're not going to hear about that. Anyway, so every 210 days. So I have a 5D teaching technique that we use in my clinic, every single patient. We just kind of went through the first of the 5Ds, which is the determination of the patient's debilitating condition, or what are you doing here, right? And a lot of that is explaining to my patients why I'm the advocate that I am. But the second D is the most important D of the visit to the extent of history, the determinant of past use. If there's ever anything that's ever named after me in medicine, it'll be the Dr. Barry Gordon Doobie Scale, and I have trademarked it. So Doobie 1s, and 1/3 of my patients, everybody, 1/3. 1/3. Once again, that's why it's so interesting, Jeff, when I listen to all the various presentations and everything, every bit of everything that everybody says is valid, but each patient is different. A Doobie 1 who has never done is decidedly different from a Doobie 4, which is not even on the scale. Doobie 4 is Willie Nelson and Snoop Dogg. They're everyday wake and bakers. They're the give me more crowd, okay? And they exist too. But Doobie 1s are the 1/3 of my patients that have never used cannabis in their life before coming into a cannabis clinic. I got it. Not joint, not anything, Doobie 2s, past experience had to stop. Job, kids, marriage. In Florida, we have snowbirds that come down for 5 months from Canada. What the heck are you supposed to do with them? They're off their alcohol, and they're not taking Ativan anymore, but they don't have a qualifying condition. Here they are in Florida. Am I going to send them to the legacy market to be illegal and unsafe? Of course not. Doobie 3s, currently users of cannabis. Doobie 3, set me free, get me off the legacy market, get me safe, legal, educated. How? The how. How is medical cannabis different? Here's my 30-second elevator speech, okay, to when you run into a politician or a doctor that doesn't know what you do or this or that. How is medical cannabis different than pot, weed? It's all the cannabinoids. You have to get everybody off the muscle of THC only, right? To those that are prohibitionists, it's THC, THC, THC. No, it's actually 140 different cannabinoids, right? Then strain specificity, right? The terpene profile, right? What elevates, what energizes, what puts you to sleep. And here's one of the most important things is the method of delivery. It's the other thing that the prohibitionists are on the muscle about. It's the smoking of the THC joint. No, it's actually the utilization of all the cannabinoids. We have tinctures, we have topicals, we have creams. I even have a suppository for you, Mr. Politician over there, okay? But the point is, when you talk to doctors and those that don't understand about that it's not just one cannabinoid, it's all the cannabinoids, and it's not just the smoking of the joint, it's all the routes of delivery. That allows people to mix up what we call a safe witch's brew, so to speak, for each individual. And I want to get to that dosing thing in a second. The third D is the duality of the plant. Okay, we like to keep things simple for our patients. Duality means THC here stands alone as your main intoxicant, and then CBD is the queen of the prom on the other side. CBD leads the way of CBG, CBC, CBN, all these other beautiful minor cannabinoids that we don't know enough about yet. And it's just the fact of the matter, we just don't. The dispensary experience, so we keep it simple. We say for our newbies, we don't dose, never dose, because I got Willie Nelson over here that's done it every day of his life, and I got Grandma over here that's never done it, right? So we talk about a micro-dosing delivery system, right? This is the dispensary experience, right? Various dispensaries. Thank you so much to the Flowery, and I mean it, and Curaleaf as well for being the two MMTC organizations in Florida to step up and support this conference. I surely don't take it for granted. Love Trulieve too, which is Terel's organization. They have been fantastic for medical education in Florida. So, I don't want to leave that out. This is my office, everybody, with our product room, display of all the various products in Florida. The delivery method is and I'm almost done, is the magic 5th D. So when I have a nurse or a doctor in my office, and I have them all the time, I love to trick them because when I say, well, you know what the 5th D has to be? It's going to have to be dosing, right? And they fall into the trap. Of course it's not, just because of what we said. It's actually the delivery methods because of the timing involved. We love patches in my clinic because a patch delivers a slow, steady delivery. Inhalation, the exact opposite. We love teaching the elderly who have never used cannabis in their life to vape. We teach them how to vape because I want family and patient to know within 5 to 10 minutes what the effects are of their product. If you do a tincture under your tongue, you're waiting 15, 20 minutes, a half hour, edibles an hour. If you don't feel effect, that's when you're going to take your second dose. And then 3 hours later, you may not be very happy about that. That doesn't happen with inhalation. When you're starting new patients, inhalation is the best and safest way to titrate them into the system. So in answer to your question, it just depends who you are. If you're Willie Nelson, you're going to get the discussion about the CBD and the other cannabinoids. The greatest thing in the world is when the 80-year-olds come in. They've used pot for years. They're just there to get their cards. And I've had them cry in the chairs to the ability to get their cards. But they've never heard of CBD. And they come back in 200 days and they thank us for taking the time to teach them because they're not 18 anymore. They may feel that way. Interesting fact, Shakespeare in his pipes, traces of cannabis, which is very interesting, of course. Core tenet of my practice, we don't discriminate, we educate. Patient safety, 100%, plus education and control equals relief, right? And how to get the relief you want, this, that, whatever. Hang on, I got to show my last slide. This is all in there. So this was a slide that was commissioned by Don, my media guy. So this goes to show what's going on, maybe if something would change in Florida and they would make cannabis illegal again, or in the states that don't have legal access. Here's the little old lady talking to the guy in the alley about topicals and tinctures and patches and creams, right? Because that's what's going on. The topicals are so effective and the new routes and methods are so effective. If you're not doing teaching in your clinic, you're just handing out a card, you're not doing medical cannabis. Okay. Got it.
Now you could tell he's been doing this for a while because he was totally on point with his time. Our next presenter today is going to come to us virtually, and that is Dr. Denise Vidot, Assistant Professor at the School of Nursing and Health Sciences, University of Miami. And Dr. Vidot will be talking to us about the priority of future research.
Hello, good afternoon. May I have confirmation that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, fantastic. Well, first of all, I'd like to start off and say that I'm quite devastated that I'm not there live, especially after hearing my good friend Barry give that very lively talk. As anybody knows, I love to be around our community, but unfortunately, I am, here keeping us safe. So I'm a little under the weather. And I do appreciate the opportunity to still communicate with you all through Zoom. Thank goodness for technology. So first of all, I am Dr. Denise Christina Vidot. I am a cannabis and psychedelic epidemiologist at the University of Miami. I have multiple appointments at the School of Medicine, Nursing, and Health Studies. And the reason why I am starting off with that is because I want to make sure everyone is aware that my lens is more from an epidemiologic perspective and what is the actual data telling us. And I'm very happy actually again to go after Barry because much of what he said is feeding right into the conversation. It was almost as if we planned our talks to be feeding into each other like this. But I'm going to be sharing really, first of all, I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. The information that I'm sharing with you today is not funded. It is my personal and my laboratory's findings. So I do want to start there. In addition, some of the results that I'm going to be showing to you all today is actually in collaboration with some other affiliations that I have. The first one is with SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University in New York, then UNC Cancer Center, Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, and then the University of Texas Health. Much of my work is very multidisciplinary and also collaborative with different geographical regions. And the reason why is because, as Dr. Gordon was mentioning, each state has their own perspective when it comes to how to approach cannabis, in particular medicinal cannabis. So by the time today's over, I hope, first of all, that none of you have zoomed out yet and zoned out. So if so, welcome back. But either way, these are our learning objectives. By the time I'm done communicating with you today, I hope that you have a good brief introduction to the historical context of cannabis. I know I'm preaching to the choir with some of this information, but I do hope that you still leave with a new nugget of information. And that pun is quite intended. But most of all, I want you to leave recognizing that not all cannabis is created equal, and neither are the consumers. So this is the Cannabis in Sports Conference. So what I'm going to be talking about is cannabis and sports. But before we go there, I want to make sure all of us are at baseline, because we can't have a conversation about cannabis and sports without recognizing words and terminology and etiology. So first here, these are all the different ways to say the word cannabis. One thing that you'll notice here, first of all, this is from Dr. Ethan Russo. If you're in the cannabis space and have not heard of him, I do highly recommend that you just search some of his work because he is quite the pioneer, I must say. In one of his books and articles, he really delineated the different ways to communicate about the word cannabis. None of those ways, however, was using the term marijuana. And this talk is not about that, but I do want to start there because I'm not going to be calling it that. This is cannabis that we're talking about. And in fact, I encourage you to do your own research after I speak, because if you look at the Library of Congress in the United States, you'll see the evidence that does point to the fact that marijuana is actually a slang term. And indeed, the word was hyper glorified during 1930 era with Harry Aslinger. So we're not going to go into the politics, but it's important to realize that words matter. And even the words in itself have been dissected in the ways that people are able to use it, whether they're in professional sporting environments or at the NCAA level, or even in casual sporting environments. Taking a step back further, just again, making sure we're all on the same page, because I don't want to take anything for granted here, y'all. Pharmacological discoveries have evidence showing that cannabis has been used for medicine about 3000 BCE. In fact, if you look at figure 2, the United States is the latest, actually no, Canada, but the United States is almost last coming to the party when it comes to cannabis. So it's quite confusing as to why we're trying to rewrite history and what this plant has been used for. So in brief, again, recognizing this is not a historical conversation, we have to note, though, that even in the 1800s, cannabis was being used for research experiences, but the United States has something called the United States Pharmacopoeia. And this is basically a list of all the medicines, all the herbs, anything that can be used to heal humans. So you'll notice that in 1850, cannabis was in that. It was there all the way up until 1942. And that's quite interesting if you look at it from a perspective of political environment. We're just going to leave that there for y'all to digest. So here is actually a screenshot of what it looked like back then when it was included. And again, you'll note that in 1942, cannabis was removed after being included since the 1800s. Here, you'll notice that physicians were actually given instructions on how to create their own tinctures. Here, you'll see John L. Hopkins. That is, let's just put the twos and twos. But the point that I'm trying to say is that it's quite absurd from an epidemiologic perspective that we're even having this conversation as if it's new. The fact that we are unable to talk about cannabis in the perspective of sport without, political ramifications or stigma is quite against what this medical evidence is suggesting. Finally, just to bring it into some current events here we're looking at 2017. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine created this report. It was a very deep dive, systematic review of every research study that has been conducted in response, including cannabis, cannabinoids, marijuana, whatever term you want to use. You'll see here that chronic pain is the darkest green. That's because that had the most substantial and conclusive evidence of the health impact in a positive way that cannabis has. So if we were to think about this now in the context of where we are as a nation, at where we are within the context of sports after this, pain is the most prevalent condition in America. We're not even talking about among athletes yet, but we're talking about Americans in general. In fact, the prevalence of pain is higher than cancer, diabetes, and heart disease altogether. So if we know that pain is so prevalent, and we know that cannabis has substantial evidence that it can improve pain, why are we still having this conversation? In an article that was actually published in collaboration with the NCAA and some researchers at various universities in 2017, they noted the different levels of pain in elite athletes. And in this article, if you were to look at it, they denote that pain also includes psychosocial influences. So that means that we cannot look at it similar to how cannabis is, where you can't just look at one cannabinoid. Pain in itself is not just the X versus Y. It's a little more complex than that. Briefly, just so we can understand the process of pain and how cannabis can actually influence, we're talking about what the future of research is for cannabis in sport. Well, here we currently already know the progression of pain. On the left, you'll see what it looks like with a normal injury. This is not any kind of overuse of, or prolonged pain. This is just musculoskeletal injury. You see the black line, that's the typical course of recovery. Looking at the figure to the right, this is prolonged pain. This is what we typically see, especially among athletes, because when being treated for the pain, even if it's an acute pain, it's really from the approach of get back in the game. And there is scientific evidence and research that has supported that evidence as well, which has been cited in this article here. So taking it the step further, this article highlighted that the psychological factors can play important roles in pain, just like the actual injury themselves. The reason why I'm highlighting this is because we already know that we have an endocannabinoid system in our body. And we know this because Dr. Gordon just mentioned it. But if you didn't hear it before then, just know, even if you've never consumed cannabis, you have cannabinoids in your body. Excuse me. So here is a figure, and I apologize for that. Here's a figure that shows how your body processes pain. Now, just to get to the point here, let's look at number 3. Ooh, excuse me. Pain is in all 3 of these key areas within your brain. And where I'm most interested as an epidemiologist is how the response to pain comes down to your heart and other chronic illnesses. This is a very well established study that shows what helps with different types of pain. Opioids, of course, is in all of this, but I'd like to draw your attention to show that so are cannabinoids. The difference is that even though we know that cannabinoids can help pain, due to the federal status and due to the various implications per state, most physicians don't even look to cannabis. And quite frankly, the pharmaceutical industry with opioids has more prevalent conversations that I should just leave it like that. The fact is, there's data. There's data showing that right now there are more NFL retired alumni that are using opioids than the general population by threefold. By threefold. This study that was conducted, and again, I kind of went back fast, but this study was conducted with ESPN in conjunction with Washington University School of Medicine. And it was basically looking at a survey of alumni, NFL alumni, and asking various health outcomes. One of them was related to their opioid use. So you'll see here that among those alumni, over half reported that they used opioids, and then 71% reported their misuse. And then, of course, again, and I just want to re-highlight this again, that in this study of NFL alumni, their prevalence of current, as in when this study was conducted, opioid use was still 3 times the rate of the general population. This is a problem because in the general population, we're having an epidemic. In the general population, not even considering athletes, we are seeing people dying from overdoses, having people who are misusing other substances. The list goes on, and it's irrelevant for this conversation because the point is we need to take action because there's evidence that suggests that cannabis can help. This here is some pilot data that has to do with some non-athletes actually that came in and took part of what's called the Bruce protocol. So they were on the treadmill and we tested their cardiorespiratory fitness in multiple ways. We had 2 groups. They were consumers and then those who have never consumed cannabis in their life. Each of the groups were matched for their age, gender, also their socioeconomic status. So theoretically, the only difference between their groups were the cannabis use status. So here you'll notice that there was no real significant differences in their VO2 max. The biggest differences that we saw is when it came to the heart rate. The reason why I'm highlighting this is because one of the main arguments that's being used against cannabis being used by athletes is the fact that either A, there's 3 different arguments. Either one, you are, and I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for this one because it's quite spicy. There's 3 arguments that happen that are being used as to why you should not be using cannabis in sport. One is either cannabis gives you an unfair advantage. That's one argument. Another argument is that cannabis actually puts others in danger because of the slower response rate. And then the third argument is the federal status and the fact that it's illegal. But I just want to make sure everyone is aware that, the data is not supporting what these statuses, what these policies are suggesting. So now that we're all on the same page on baseline and where we are today, let's talk about the future of what we can be doing. Unfortunately, I can't see the audience or I'm not unaware of who's at the conference, but I'm hoping that each and every one of you can take away a way to either improve your practice, improve your companies, or just improve your community by being able to educate about cannabis in response to sport and in health perspectives. So here, I'm not going to go deep into this because Dr. Gordon went into this, but this is just a visual representation of some of the ways that we can use cannabis. And similar to the thought process of Dr. Gordon, I do not consider medical cannabis to be medical cannabis unless it includes THC because of what we call the ensemble effect. So one thing to bring us again back to baseline, in case you don't get it yet, this endocannabinoid system is part of our body. Unfortunately, we just didn't discover it until the 90s, but it's just like, it exists just like our respiratory system and cardiovascular. This system keeps us at homeostasis. So when thinking about the future of research, I think about it in the context, honestly, of my laboratory. So here is a graphical representation, honestly, of what I consider my lab to be and consist of. This here shows all of our organs in our body. If you notice, you'll see either a CB1 or a CB2. Those correspond to the two main receptors that we know about within our endocannabinoid system. Every single organ has at least one of these endocannabinoid system receptors. Therefore, any disease, misalignment, health condition, anything that includes some of these organs can be theoretically influenced by phytocannabinoids, which is found in the plant of cannabis. Now, let's bring us back to remembering this NFL study as an example. And the NFL is not the only sport. I just use that as an example because that's the research that I saw that was published. But other sports have similar processes. So let's think about this from a pain perspective. If we know that cannabis can influence pain and influence the brain, which also influence that psychosocial impact that the other article was mentioning was important, then why not look deeper? And I actually encourage any researchers to consider looking beyond what we know of just its main two receptors. So for example, this here is from an article that was published. The link is below if you'd like to look at it. But it is basically showing the distribution of cannabinoid receptors. So again, the CB1 and CB2 among the throughout the human pain system. Because the pain system, remember, is not just, X, Y. If you look at the human body here to the left, you'll see that there's various components. But guess what? Cannabis can influence all of that. And there's evidence that suggests that these receptors are on every single thing, down to the nerve terminal. If you guys are not listening to anything else I say today, please remember that cannabis receptors are even down to the nerve terminals. Now let's look at the cell. Even more minuscule than the terminals themselves, there's so much evidence that suggests how cannabis, in particular THC, so to leave any THC out of the medical cannabis could cause some type of unknown reaction, honestly, because the research here is showing that THC almost mimics our endocannabinoids, which I didn't even talk about that much before, but you'll notice in the red here, there's 2-AG and AEA. Anyway, not to get too much in the weeds of things, I just want the punchline of this information is not all cannabis is created equal. And the future of cannabis research, especially within the context of the sports industry, whether it's athletes, during the game, after the game, before the game, we need to move beyond THC and CBD. Dr. Gordon started mentioning the other metabolites of THC, delta 8, delta 10, beyond that. We need to think about what's the research of these cannabinoids and how are they influencing our body. We have some preliminary evidence, but the reality is, due to the federal status, epidemiologists like me have so many blocks to be able to run randomized control trials, for example, to really show the evidence to change physicians' ability to prescribe or recommend. In addition, when thinking about the future research priorities, I encourage any researcher to look beyond CB1 and CB2 receptors. This is I feel about this like I do about cannabinoids. Yes, we have CB1, CB2. Those are the most documented. Let's talk about TRPV1. Those are receptors that are in the tongue, in the kidney, liver. If it's in the tongue, is this the reason why smoking cannabis may even have more of a benefit effect that we don't even know of? Or oral edible? There's just so much that can be learned if we just stop pigeonholing ourselves and being, let me not go left. So to wrap things up here, I just want to reiterate what the fact of the matter is that even now during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's something that I'm sure everybody's tired of hearing in this pandemic. Trust me, at this moment in time, I am so over COVID. But the reality is that it's here. In a study that was conducted in 2020 all the way up until 2022, which was led by my team, we've saw and we interviewed about 3,000 medical cannabis users. And out of all 3,000 consumers, 65% said that they use cannabis to manage their mental health related chronic diseases, depression, anxiety. PTSD wasn't even on the list. And guess what? Anxiety and depression is not a qualifying condition of cannabis, in most states, I should say. And then you'll see here, second place was pain, and chronic pain to be particular. So reiterating with just the dangers, and when you're thinking about the future of research, here is a map of some of the respondents from that study I was talking about, the COVID-19 cannabis health study. In the green, you'll see those who endorse medicinal use. In the orange, you'll see those who are recreational, quote unquote recreational, but to me that word doesn't exist. I believe it's adult use, but that's another conversation for another day. The point of this map is that you see where the cannabis consumers are, right? Well, looking at this map, you see what the actual legalization status is. You see where it's completely, illegal, you see where it's decriminalized. So bringing it back to where the patients actually are. So let's say, for example, in Dallas or even in Georgia, it's not allowed. So what kind of cannabis are these patients getting? And then the patients that do have access to medicinal cannabis, look at the cost of the cannabinoids. You're talking about anywhere from $2,000 for 50 capsules, and for those of you who are in practice, you understand that this is not acceptable for access. So bringing it back, it's not acceptable because the type of cannabis matters because of our human endocannabinoid system. Not every cannabinoid fits into each receptor, and you see that beautifully with THC and CBD in the brain. So to keep things extremely spicy, and let me see my time here. To keep things even more spicy in my last 9 minutes here, I want to show an even more futuristic concept of when it comes to where future research is going. So in our COVID-19 cannabis health study, which is the data I just presented to you, this is the breakdown of the type of cannabis consumers that self-reported. Of course, it was a survey, so we weren't looking at medical cards or anything like that. One thing to note is that the cannabis consumers noted a 39% increase of use during COVID. But something else caught our attention. 26.1% of the cannabis consumers were also psilocybin consumers. And of them, 4.1 reported an increase of their dose during the pandemic. So how can we think about this in the context of sport and future research? Well, the way my laboratory is focusing on it is taking this as preliminary evidence to then think about it from an epidemiologic perspective. So this is data here that's preliminary. It's unpublished. So I just, you guys are getting hot off the press information here. I did share, let me not go there. So anyway, this is here showing mental health prevalences. In the orange, you'll see those who consumed both psilocybin and cannabis. Now, as a caveat, we don't know if it happened in the same sitting, but what we do know is it was within the last 7 days. And then in the green, those are those who only consume cannabis. What you'll notice here is that the prevalence, the amount of people who reported having anxiety, depression, PTSD, and pain was statistically significantly lower, say that 3 times, in the psilocybin plus cannabis group than cannabis alone. This is just cross-sectional study data. So please, I'm not saying anything causes anything, but what I am saying is that the future of the research should consider looking, is this just by chance because of the pandemic? Or is there some way that we can leverage this information to benefit athletes after, before, and during the game? And with that, I just want to say that if anyone's interested in collaborating, some of the things that my laboratory does is literally almost every organ, as I mentioned. And the reality is that athletes, especially as alumni, have a higher prevalence of a lot of these chronic health conditions. So again, thank you so much for your attention. And I'm, again, so sorry that I'm not there live so that I can see all your beautiful faces in the flesh. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and yield the floor back. Peace.
Well, that was really super spectacular. Thank you so much, Dr. Vidot. And the future conversation of psilocybin is one that I'm particularly excited about. So maybe that'll be a conversation for another day. We're going to move next, and we're going to start talking about one of my very favorite subjects, and that's the terpenoids. Dr. Vidot mentioned Dr. Ethan Russo, and if you're interested in clinical cannabis therapeutics and you have not studied the teachings of Dr. Russo, I really recommend you look him up and hear what he has to offer. The first time I heard Ethan was shortly after he published his paper in 2011, and it was entitled Taming THC, Potential Cannabis Synergy and Phytocannabinoid Terpenoid Entourage Effects, and it blew my mind. So we heard Dr. Gordon say how this is so much more about THC. Dr. Vidot said cannabis is so much more than just THC, and the terpenes are my favorite constituents, and I, am a student of Dr. Russo, and his philosophy is that it's really the terpenes that drive the therapeutic effects. So I'm super excited to hear Dr. Terel Newton, who is the medical director for Trulieve, Florida, and also the medical director of Total Pain Relief, LLC, an interventional pain consultant. And he's going to be talking to us today about the mechanisms of major terpenes and cannabinoids in sports medicine.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that introduction there. And we'll just get oriented with the pointer here as well so we can get started. I became interested in this topic having trained in Vermont, and Vermont is a cultivation state. So we also have that last condition, which is anything that the provider deemed medically necessary. And Vermont is a lot more liberal. In Vermont, we have not only physicians, but also naturopathic providers and mid-level providers that can give cannabis recommendations. And so I learned a lot, and most of it was from the patients. And at that time, there was not a lot of certificate of lab analysis that we could look at and review. But over time, just hearing patient story after patient story, like Dr. Conan said, an N of one. And when you start to see all these N's of ones for different conditions, it really kind of blows your mind at the versatility of the medication. So I have a few disclosures. I am a practicing physician. I have research interests. I've actually completed a research project with Geisinger University. And I like to support consultants and educators in the cannabis industry. And I'm not asking to be paid for the presentation today. The disclaimers are the same ones that you've heard before. Some of these medicines may not be approved or endorsed by the FDA. Legal status varies on a state, federal, local, and organizational level. Some of these medications have side effects and additional warnings. If you're planning or hope to become pregnant, there may be other concerns and different conversations you want to have with your physician. So thinking big picture, cannabis in my world, which is the pain and injury world, is just a small part of a larger context of treatment options for patients. So you have your physical treatments. With athletes, I kind of categorize most of what they do in this category. Physical conditioning, working on balance, endurance, speed, strength training, interventional. So if an athlete does have an injury, there's a few options: nerve ablations, cortisone and non-cortisone injections, stem cell treatments, prescription medications, and here we have cannabis, which is under the plant-based medicines, which not only includes what we eat, but then also different things we can take in the hemp category and also in the medical marijuana category. From a psychiatric standpoint, athletes are always talking about mindset and being resilient with what they do in order to receive the best outcomes. And then there's referrals. So referrals to other specialists, which can include nutritionists, but then also for severe injuries, surgical referrals. So a few of the previous speakers did a good job of putting things in context. And what I look at is in the early 1900s, we could prescribe cannabis. We give recommendations now, but these are some of the tinctures and also capsules that we prescribed back in the early 1900s. And it was in our pharmacopoeia books. The very first medical cannabis conference was in 1906 at Ohio State University. And so over time, we see that, there's been tighter and tighter regulations, and now we see it open up to some degree. But this is the context of what we're talking about, something that was available. And so because of this, we are over 100 years behind the research here in the United States. So that's why we look to other areas, but we're gradually catching up. So this is the GOAT, the greatest of all time researchers.
Third picture today.
When you think about the mechanisms of cannabis, think about Raphael Mechoulam. So he was the person that isolated THC, and he also discovered anandamide, which is our body's own THC, and part of our endocannabinoid system. So when we look at cannabinoids, we have the cannabis in our bodies, we have the cannabis from plants, and we have synthetic cannabinoids. For this presentation, I'm focused on the cannabis in our bodies and the cannabis from the plant. So my goal has always been to be one of the best educators in Florida. And when I was researching Dr. Cohen and I saw how smart he was, I kind of took it personal. It was like a personal challenge. This guy, who does he think he is? He's educating all these people. And like Michael Jordan, I kind of took that personally. And, being from Carolina, that's where I went to medical school. I did my anesthesia residency there. So I decided to step my game up. And so the way I'm going to step my game up is not only am I going to teach you the anatomy and physiology, I'm going to teach you the botany, the organic, and the biochemistry, the pharmacology, histology, and we're going to look at some MRIs along the way. So we've talked about the endocannabinoid system, and we know that we have many organ systems in the body. And the wonderful thing about the endocannabinoid system is it communicates with all of these other organ systems. And we can take this to our advantage when we specifically look at traumatic brain injuries that he discussed earlier, because there's various receptors in different parts of the brain, so we can reduce inflammation in various anatomic areas. Not only that, we can also treat other diseases that goes beyond just concussions, brain tumors, ALS, Parkinson's disease, spasticity, and different types of even vascular injuries like stroke. So what we're going to talk a little bit is about the seed form of cannabis, and then I'm going to go and talk a little bit mostly about the cannabinoids, THC, CBD, and then get into what we call terpenes. So when we look at the synthetic pathways, see if I can get my pointer here. So we have how the plant synthesizes the acidic forms. So these are the precursors, THCA, CBDA, and our cannabinoids. There's also a group of medicines that's in the cannabis plant called terpenes. And this is showing the synthetic pathways, but there is a common origin, GPP, general pyrophosphate, don't worry about the names, but they all come from a common starting material. There's also another group of medicines called flavonoids that's also in cannabis as well as other plants. So in this discussion, we're going to talk about some of the greatest athletes of all time and how they use cannabis in their treatment programs. And so looking at these categories, I set this up as more like a trivia, so it can be somewhat interactive. So I'm going to go through each athlete and see if you all can guess what athlete I'm talking about. So in this discussion, we're going to talk about how athletes have cannabis as part of their prevention plan for nutritional deficiencies and diseases. Most of those diseases are related to inflammation. So for example, with chronic joint injuries, we're talking about, for example, facet disease. We're talking about chronic arthritis of the elbow, of the knees as well. For alleviating pain, concussion symptoms, anxiety, and depression. And we'll talk a little bit about adult and social uses, because that is another part of what athletes do as well. So first athlete, 44-year-old active, so that kind of gives a lot of it away. Professional football player. He takes supplements such as hemp and other products. He's a 7-time Super Bowl champion, 3-time NFL most valuable player. He has multiple records, including most quarterback wins, most pass completions, most passing touchdowns. Tom Brady. All right, we got it. So Tom Brady, he uses hemp seeds in his smoothie along with chia seeds and flax seeds. And this is the anti-inflammatory cascade here of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which are our anti-inflammatory fatty acids. So when we look at the pathways here.
Terel, can you imagine if Tom Brady would have spoken up when Ricky Williams did, and the difference that would have made? Kind of a social, racial commentary, but I guarantee if Tom Brady would have said he's not signing his contract 12 years ago unless he's allowed to use cannabinoids,
Yeah.
we'd see a different attitude.
It would have changed, the policy would have changed before the sun went down, I would say. All right, so let's take a look at histology here. So here we have a baseline here with none of the omega-3 fatty acids. And we can just look at the wall thickness here, and this is looking at atherosclerosis. So here we have the control, and then here we have 2 omega-3 fatty acids right there. And so those are EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, dicosahexaenoic acid. Not to be confused with DHEA, which is dehydroepiandrosterone, which is a precursor to steroids. All right, so let's take a look here. And so these are the nutritional facts for hemp seeds here. And I just want to remind us that we're all talking about this stage. So we're not at a stage where the plant is actually making THC and CBD, which is here at the harvesting stage. So we're at this end. And this slide will come up again a little bit later. So the next player, this is a 36-year-old retired professional football player, 6-time Pro Bowl champion, has the NFL record for most receiving yards in a season and most consecutive 100-yard receiving games. I'll give you another hint. He spoke about using cannabis for chronic pain in his Hall of Fame speech. Wide receiver. His nickname is Megatron. Calvin Johnson. Okay, great. All right, so when we look at the pain pathway, and we've had actually a few presenters do an excellent job of presenting this already. Pain is not just, a wire of information, okay? So we have this pathway. We have outside here inflammation, which we can slow, but then also cannabis interrupts the pain signal in multiple areas. So this is not a continuous wire, but there's breaks in that wire called synapses that help us regulate the pain signal. And so not only is cannabis and the other components helping with the peripheral area of inflammation, it's also helping with the pain signal here and also the interpretation of pain and how we feel about it, basically the emotional context of pain. And it does that by alleviating anxiety and depression associated with that. All right, so we have our list at the top right of phytocannabinoids, of course CBD and THC, but then also many other cannabinoids that help with the pain pathway, and then the entourage effect. So one of our earlier speakers mentioned the entourage effect, but she also mentioned something called the ensemble effect. So I just want to, just for a moment, explain the difference. So the entourage effect is where you have a primary cannabinoid acting as the main influence when you're treating a symptom. For example, if you're treating insomnia, if you're treating pain, where THC is the main cannabinoid, but then you have a supporting cast. So you have others, so you have CBD and you also have terpenes. With the ensemble effect, all of the components are acting near equally in terms of potency and influence. Okay, so you have the entourage effect where you have the main person, for example, that's your LeBron James, and then your supporting cast, whereas the ensemble effect, there's near equal influence of the different components. So inflammation is another very important component of pain, and also looking at preservation and the longevity of the athletes, not only their season, but also their career. We have the cannabinoids mentioned in the previous slide and the pathways for that. And then there's an entourage effect with alpha-pinene, for example, which is an anti-inflammatory, beta-myrcene, which is also an anti-inflammatory, and beta-carotene. Beta-carotene acts on CB2 receptors, so it functions as not only a terpene, but also as similar to a cannabinoid. So when we think of cannabidiol, there's more than 70 protein interactions with cannabidiol, and this includes receptors, ion channels, transporters, and enzymes. And just as a mnemonic here, when you think of cannabidiol, it means it can bind DARE, okay? Cannabidiol can bind DARE. So you take the TH and make it into a D. Many, many interactions. So let's take another look here. So this is a 62-year-old retired quarterback, chronic pain, history of multiple concussions. He actually had, I think, 15 surgeries while he was playing. Played 15 seasons, two-time Super Bowl champion, Jim McMahon. Excellent, excellent. Okay. And so he actually exhibited all 6 of the concussion categories that Dr. Conan talked about earlier. Post-traumatic headaches, usually in the form of migraines, anxiety, mood disturbance, vestibular disturbance, chronic neck pain. He actually had a cervical fracture at some point during a season, oculomotor problems, and cognitive and fatigue injuries there. And he was actually diagnosed with dementia at some point. And Dr. Conan did a great job of talking about the patent here. So one thing I did want to mention about that is it not only includes concussion, it includes Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and HIV-related dementia. So for neurologic disorders, when we think about concussion, a big part of that is loss of memory. Not only does the inflammation come down, but also alpha-pinene, which is a terpene, it can help increase your acetylcholine, which is the memory molecule. And one of the ways it does that is it decreases the breakdown of acetylcholine by being an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. Okay, another symptom associated with concussions is insomnia and also muscle spasms. We see this with brain injuries and also spinal cord injuries. You have your THC, but then your CBN, which is cannabinol, and there's an entourage effect with beta-myrcene, which has a sedative effect, and linalool. Yeah, and Dr. Conan and one of the other speakers, at least one of the other speakers, mentioned the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So with Jim McMahon, he takes about 300 to 400 milligrams of THC a day. When you're getting into that range of above 100 milligrams of THC, I think you should monitor for this because it can cause nausea. And the treatment for it is, of course, stop consuming for a short period of time. Take hot showers to help your body get rid of the cannabinoids and increase your metabolism. All right. Okay, now we're getting into more current events here. A 22-year-old female Olympic runner. She won multiple 100-meter titles, qualified for the Olympics, but wasn't able to participate because of positive THC screen. Shakira Richardson, great. All right, and here's another Olympic athlete. This is probably the easiest one for everybody. 5-time USA Olympic team member. He's actually the most decorated Olympic athlete of all time, has 23 gold medals, and the next closest person has, I think, 9. Yes, Michael Phelps. So he got to keep his Olympic golds because he never tested positive. And so someone like him who probably has a single-digit body fat percentage, he can get cannabis out of his system much, much quicker. And probably just as part of his normal routine, it would probably come out of his system. His metabolism is superhuman. All right. And I thought I mentioned one other athlete, but in a different sport. 37-year-old male. He's an active professional basketball player, 4-time NBA champion, 4-time finals MVP, number 2 all-time scoring leader in the NBA. So in his book, Shooting Stars, he talked about how he used cannabis while he was in high school for anxiety and the pressure of being the next Michael Jordan. Number 2 all-time leading scorer. LeBron James, perfect. You probably got thrown off by the colors. I did color coordinate some of these. These were his high school colors.
Indeed.
Yeah.
St. Vincent, St. Mary, Akron,
Yeah.
Ohio.
Yep, in Akron. Okay, great. So let's look at anxiety and PTSD. So, we know there's a biphasic effect with THC. At low doses, it actually helps anxiety, but at higher doses, it can increase anxiety. It works synergistic with CBD and the other cannabinoids. Beta-myrcene is going to be your primary sedating terpene that's going to help the patient prevent from getting that anxiety associated with eating too much edibles, as well as your linalool. D-limonene is also very important. I mentioned it earlier for chronic pain. It's very good for neuropathic pain, but as an anxiolytic, D-limonene by itself is a great supplement. For the anxiety and depression, of course, with the endocannabinoid system, we want to focus on helping a patient reach homeostasis. So it does that through the CBD, much more so than the THC. You do get some euphorians and psychoactive effects, which is, again, that's not a side effect, that is a desired effect when you're talking about depression and helping someone maintain their mindset. I remember Josephine taught me that this causes what we call a perceptual shift. You often see this in hospice patients as well when they get to a point where they feel so defeated that they will not endorse that anything has helped them, and they're trying to accept the condition, which is terminal in that point in hospice. But this is one of the things that could really improve the quality of life with end-of-life issues. All right, so two more. This is probably one of the easier ones. 75-year-old retired professional basketball player. He received the Presidential Medal of Honor, Medal of Freedom. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So he basically had migraines, and so we learned earlier that there's an endocannabinoid deficiency. Migraines, IBS, and fibromyalgia conditions cause those, and when you supplement the phytocannabinoids, which are endocannabinoids, you overcome that deficiency. And then there's a bonus round here. 50-year-old male, youth football league founder and coach. Some of the athletes in his youth football league now play in the NFL. He started the first ever digital weed farms. His name is synonymous with cannabis. Snoop, yep, you got it. Snoop Dogg, Calvin Brodus. All right, so in summary, use a team approach when talking about cannabis. You want to have your team member who's educated, and that's their specialty. You want to think about the fundamentals, which is cannabis in the body, the endocannabinoid system, and the cannabis in the plant, which is the phytocannabinoids, the terpenes, and flavonoids. When you think about the mechanisms, it's always endocannabinoid system plus. So there's some other mechanism where patients are getting benefit, but the hallmark is and your foundation is know about the endocannabinoid system. Gold level athletes, they use cannabis. There's a variety of ways and a variety of goals that they have. Keep in mind the risks with high dose THC, the cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, and we need more research to show why certain athletes are doing better than others when they approach and integrate cannabis into their programs. So if you have any questions or concerns, you need a physician to help you collaborate on any projects. I certainly don't mind doing that. Again, like I said, I have research interests in cannabis, and if there's anything I can do to help you, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Yeah, before I lose the thought, Terel, when you get into the terpenes too, that's what defines medical, and the better medical programs from legal adult use are the labels. People want to repeat what goes on with their cannabis use. The only way to do that is to have a well-labeled product that tells you your percentage of THC, your CBD, your minor cannabinoids, and your terpene profile. It's something that we insist upon in Florida, that we're going to continue to insist upon in Florida. And as we go towards legal adult use, which will happen in Florida, we can't lose our medical program. It's too essential to our veterans, our elderly retirees, our pediatric patients. We need to continue to insist on the quality of product and the labeling. That's what makes medical cannabis medical.
All right, so we have 10 minutes left before we go next door for our reception, which is hosted by Trulieve tonight. So thank you, Terel, for that. So we're going to take the last 10 minutes. Again, we ask if you have a question, get the mic because this is being recorded. It looks like Dr. Vidot is still with us for this portion. So if anybody's got any questions specific, specific to either Dr. Terel, Dr. Gordon, Dr. Vidot, this is your opportunity.
Great, thank you. My question is to Dr. Vidot, and first of all, thank you to all the panelists. What a tremendous session this was, like all the others. Dr. Vidot, we've heard about the importance of research and also the difficulty of research. And I was just so impressed with the research that you're doing at University of Miami. And I'm curious, like, is there just a lot of support from the top for research in this space of cannabis, or have I missed something? Do all universities conduct research like you're conducting at University of Miami?
First of all, thank you so much for this question and for listening to my talk. I appreciate that. I have been studying cannabis for over 10 years. I grew up at the University of Miami. I left, of course, to go to Georgia, and then I came back. The reason why I start there is because I think that over the 10 years of me saying the same message and not quitting, eventually I started getting a little, okay, you can do this. So I started off with secondary data that was published by the CDC. So once I started publishing and really publishing, because that created a sense of validity, then I think it started becoming a little bit easier. But make no mistake, it's not easy to conduct the research, especially when trying to do things that really transform policy, because what transform policy are randomized controlled trials. And unfortunately, the University of Miami, which is not the only one, has not been able to approve our protocols because of the federal status against the cannabis.
Yeah, it's so funny. No, it has not been support from the top. It's been the warrior, quite frankly, that Dr. Vidot is. You know what, I'm so unhappy you're not here. I wanted that advocate's hug to you, and I sent that to Martha as well. What you have to understand is that Dr. Vidot is so unique in what she's doing down at the University of Miami, and not just Denise, but Dr. Conan as well. And I know somebody mentioned the consortium of medical research that's ongoing here in Florida. Believe it or not, we're actually farther ahead of the curve than many other states, as difficult as the research may be. At least we're making the efforts. We're having great breakthroughs. And the reason for it is the talent, quite frankly, the people that are out there doing it. And Dr. Vidot leads the way. So thank you so much for what you and Dr. Weiner and, I know other people are doing down there in Miami. It's so essential right now.
Next.
Hello, how you doing today? My name is Mikhail Harris. I'm with Georgia Hemp Association. And I know I'm representing hemp, but question is really to the panel. I'm constantly trying to push the agenda of medical marijuana, or what we call medical marijuana, in the state of Georgia and in other states. My thing is MAG, which is the Medical Association of Georgia, does not embrace medical cannabis, even though it's considered medical cannabis. So my question to the panel is, what organizations are, what can we do to, first of all, bring awareness or education to the Medical Association of Georgia and other medical associations around the United States, so we can basically educate them that this is a medical situation that's going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that. I think the starting point is, of course, not only having conferences like these, but the second thing is, I would say, integrate CME. Because once you start incorporating continuing medical education, then you're not only filling that gap, but you're also helping to fill a requirement that physicians already have, which is to have a certain number of CMEs per year.
Yeah, my comment would be, as frustrating as it may be, we're so much better off than we were 5.5 years ago. I like to say that 5.5 years ago, the wall of idiocy was here at 10 feet, and the wall of legitimacy was here at 1 foot. We got it at 5 and 5 right now. That's frustrating, but when you've been there from the get-go, and I mean, Josephine over there and others, I think you would agree that these meetings and others, and what people do every single day to advance, that's why it's so important to be honest, practice with integrity, practice with the educational focus every single day, because we are tip of the spear. And as my mom taught me, if you're going to be tip of the spear, you better be pretty damn sharp. So, to me, it's why it's so important that these type of meetings do occur. But believe me when I tell you, we're so much better off. Georgia, like many states right now, and I know you're on the hemp side, my advice on the hemp side would be to focus on those minor cannabinoids right now that, quite frankly, I think the MMTC world is not providing to patients. High quality CBG, for example, high quality CBC, CBN, things of that nature, that because of the Farm Bill you're allowed to do. What's frustrated me about the hemp community has been their focus on Delta 8, 6, 10, those type of products that offer that quote-unquote intoxication effect, which is just looking for an easy buck, So to me, I have a lot of respect for high-quality, full-spectrum hemp products that are giving the enhancement. I just reviewed a book by Joel Goldstrich, Dr. Goldstrich, some of you may have heard of him, Cancer and Cannabis. He speaks to using CBG in every single medical cannabis cancer patient. And I just don't think that the MMTCs right now are really giving us enough as the physician community in those minor cannabinoids. So I think that's a great place where the hemp field can really make a big difference.
And also what I want to throw in is never underestimate the value of showing up, stepping forward, and speaking truth to power, because the way that we got our medical cannabis program moved forward and implemented in the state of Florida was a badass band of social justice warriors coming together and literally converging on the Capitol and tracking legislation. And Florida Cannabis Action Network, I have to give a shout out, has led the way. Every year, rents an apartment in Tallahassee, along with Eric Stevens, Florida for Care. Dr. Gordon works together with Charles Felix, and it was grassroots. We came together as an interdisciplinary body. We had physicians, we had mental health therapists, we had attorneys, we had moms of special needs children, we had adult kids
Veterans
who were taking care of their elder parents. We had military veterans, and we just showed up and we let them know that, you are our representatives, and we don't have the money to put into your political action committees, but what we do have is the power of our vote, and we will vote for candidates that will implement and push forward sensible cannabis policy reform. So I know I got a little off on that, but it's a passion, and if you want to change, power to the people, show up, let them know you're paying attention, and speak that truth to power, because that is a more powerful driver for change than I ever realized before I started legislative work.
Yeah, we're nowhere near where we need to be in Florida. Job protections would be a #1 mission. I don't care where you're at, Colorado, California, Canada. If you don't have protection in your workplace because of the use of cannabis, right, then you don't have freedoms, right? We need hospital and nursing home access. My prediction is the first in-hospital use of cannabis, and I'd be interested in Terel's opinion on this, will be in the acute stroke patient, in the acute brain injured patient, when we have an IV preparation for it. But why won't they let us put on a patch right now, right? We need to keep our taxes at zero, right? We're an untaxed state. I tell everybody, no matter what happens with legal adult use in Florida, the one thing I can tell you is it's going to be heavily taxed, right? We need to make sure that we have the banking issue solved. We need to work on a home grow option for medical patients, right? I have a list of at least 8 to 10 items that we need to insist and work upon while we're moving towards legal adult use. So medical in Florida essentially needs to be worked on, protected, and improved.
Absolutely. Mark?
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment about, and I'm not a doctor, nor am I an advocate like you are. I take my hat off to Josephine and Barry and what you did. I do have to say, though, I think in pressing the issue in Georgia, I think having the advocates ask the doctors, your MAD group, who has a Hippocratic oath, why are you turning your back on veterans who have anecdotally shown that PTS can be helped with cannabis? How are you turning your back on senior citizens? How are you turning your back on people that clearly have an opioid crisis in this country? And what they're doing is we are going out, and we're actually, it shows people being able to get off of cannabis, opioids by using cannabis. When you go down and you look at it from a medical standpoint, it's very hard, I think, as a doctor's association to turn your back on that. I think you've got to play some sort of political game. And I think the other is, people don't realize that for 24 years, Dr. Cristina Sanchez has been studying cannabis and cancer in Spain, when the country of Spain built her a lab. And why aren't we taking those results, and why aren't we hitting the Biden administration over the head about using those results and that research to be able to look at what's going on here in the United States? Why aren't we bringing that lab here to the United States to take a look at it? I think it's important that we point out to the medical profession how their blinders and their ignorance really doesn't fit that Hippocratic oath that they took. And I don't think that's, I think, you know, it's something where if you're going to have some advocates, that's not a bad message to handle. I just want to make a comment, that's all.
Well, and I love to see the science catching up to what people have known for thousands of years already. And as a social scientist, I like to remind our lawmakers that we have tons of anecdotal evidence, and what anecdotal evidence means is what actually works in living, breathing human beings. And we can't just, you know, dismiss the anecdotal evidence and say that, you know, this kind of evidence has more value than this kind of evidence. So let's bring it together. Let's bring the science together with the doctors, with the patients, with the families. Because when it comes down to choosing what treatment option is best, really we have to remember that the docs are not just the experts, but humans are the experts on their personal human body. So let's bring them into the equation on what medical treatment option do they want to choose. And as a social worker, I really believe in honoring informed decision making, but how is somebody supposed to make an informed decision when they're not even presented with all of their options? So it's really important to keep these types of conversations going. And I'm so glad and grateful to see you all here today. And I wish that we had people in all of those seats, and we had seats doubling, because this is the quality and caliber of education that is going to move forward sensible cannabis policy reform. So thank you, everybody, for being here. It's 5 o'clock, which means that if you flip your name tag around, you'll find a couple of cocktail tickets in there, and the reception is next door, so we hope you will join us. Right on. And we're behind the 8 ball, so hurry up and let's get over there and party.
Recording stopped.
Awesome. Bye, Denise.
Bye. It was